Hello and welcome to the Epic Human Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Blair. On today's episode, I'll be interviewing Mike Vernon, Director of Key Accounts for Global One Pet, a leader in the pet nutrition and specialty product industry. I've known Mike for over 20 years. We met actually in the 7th grade on the bus, and we've been causing trouble ever since. Mike is an endurance athlete, does triathlons, and played both soccer and baseball at the collegiate level. He now lives in Scottsdale, Arizona with his wife, 2 lovely little girls, and by the time this podcast airs, his 3rd child, a little boy. His superpower is undoubtedly his unparalleled emotional intelligence. He can make meaningful connections with seemingly anyone. He approaches building new relationships with a level of authenticity and energy that's just infectious. People gravitate to him. Hence, that's why he's had a prolific career in sales across a number of different industries, currently in the pet food industry. In this podcast, you'll learn how Mike got into a career in sales and what's made him successful, and how you can use sales skills in your life, regardless of what you do. Because after all, at the very least, we all have to sell ideas and sell ourselves in some respect to be successful. I think you'll enjoy our discussion. So without further ado, please give it up for an epic human, Mike Vernon. All right, we are live with Michael Case Vernon, sitting out in Scottsdale, Arizona. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing good today, Joe.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you on the very first podcast, which may or may not have a name yet. Thinking about calling the Epic Human Podcast, but it could have a totally different name by the time anyone besides us hears this. So thanks for going on this journey with me. Yeah, man, I guess just to start, maybe tell us a little bit about what you do and about your company and the types of customers that you're serving.
Sure. Currently, I'm working for a small kind of innovative pet firm. We call ourselves, but really we're 5 guys and a 6th woman who's basically our COO, and we work with national retailers across the United States. Generally, channel specific, but we manufacture pet products. We help develop categories, we pioneer ingredients, and we basically try to just listen to the customer out in the field and listen to what they're having to say about their animals and try to bring those products to life.
Wow. Yeah, and it's called Global One?
Yeah, Global One Pet.
Awesome. And so I think, a lot of people have pets, they go to PetSmart or whatnot, but most people probably don't run into too many people who work in the pet industry, and it seems like it's like one of those industries that a lot of people don't think about, but once you kind of dive into it, it's gigantic and it's complex. And maybe you just tell us a little bit about the industry and itself, and what most people kind of wouldn't know or wouldn't think about it.
Well, it's a growing industry, and it has been growing for the last 50, 60, 70 years, from the very get-go. And you've got some major players within pet, some big companies such as like Nestle, Mars, formerly Del Monte, Smuckers. A lot of these companies are investing in the pet category because it's got some similarities to some other really profitable channels that they're working in. The fact that it's relatively recession proof. It's not recession proof, but it's pretty darn close. Just like grocery, you got to buy food, you got to buy things for your animals that you're going to need. And in particular, as pet ownership has steadily climbed, and people are treating their pets a little bit differently now. It's no longer leave the dog outside near the barn. I mean, these are members of the family now, so people are spending money in it. So it's a multi-billion-dollar industry with a few key players and lots and lots of channel strategy for sure from the manufacturer side.
Yeah, you talk about being recession proof. It kind of reminds me of during the recession, alcohol stocks went through the roof, right? Because
Hmm.
that's a classic recession proof industry. But I imagine pets is kind of similar. I mean, people want to spend more time with their pets. They want to kind of embrace those relationships. And maybe you could tell me a little bit. Maybe you could tell everybody a little bit about just more about yourself. Like, I guess walk me through the journey to where you are today. Start from the beginning. I know a little bit about your childhood, probably more than I should, but
Yeah, we'll leave that out.
walk me through the beginnings of Mike Vernon, and then we can go all the way till today.
Sure, sure. Well, I have like you, Joe. We have a classic Italian family and mothers. And my mother likes to say that she knew I was going to be working with animals from the time I was 5. I doubt that, but I think she's just claiming that. But she says I did a lot of school projects when I was like 5 or 6 years old that all involved animals, and that's sort of all I wanted to do. And after that, I branched out. I moved on to GI Joes or Transformers or whatever it was. But she knew I had an interest, and I started to get an interest in the industry when I got this dog, Kearsarge. He was a golden retriever, and we formed this bond. And I was moving around a lot, as you know, Joey, at that time. In my life, I had moved several times in several years, and so I was always having to make new friends. And I formed this bond with my family, of course, but also the pet in my family, Kearsarge, and he became one of the family. So that sort of set me up for my psyche for my career. But I went to school in Illinois, and then moved out to Boulder, Colorado. I had started working for this awesome company called Night Eyes Incorporated, and they're like an amoeba with every category and channel out there, and for hard goods, and really kind of like high volume, lower price points, but just kind of hitting the model. And they had really innovative items, LED frisbees and flashlight collars, and they had mobile products and hardware products, and it got me exposure to a lot of different industries really quickly. So I was in mobile hardware, pet, the dive market, military shows, SHOT Show, etc. And so I went and I traveled to all these shows in my first year, and it was brutal. I think I went to Vegas for 2.5 weeks, and that was my first time ever being in Vegas. So that was so it was a brutal year, but I got exposure to all these different industries, and the one that I sort of got the most excited about was pet, because I got to see all these industry trade shows, and I walked around, and you could see things were down or things were up, and in pet, we were talking about a kind of a weird economy at that time, and things were up, up, up. People were growing. There was a lot of energy and passion, and there was like this, people were there not just to make money, but also to sell and to produce things that of value and things they like. And I got attracted to it. And there's some big dollars being thrown around in that market, and I wanted to see if I could pursue. So I started selling leashes and collars for Night Eyes, and kind of developed that channel a little bit for them. But I knew that ultimately consumables, like the food side, was going to be the ultimate ticket if I was going to make a career out of this channel. So I made a risky move, and hooked up with a couple of guys who, oddly enough, are now my employers, Global One Pet. And made a go trying to do an all natural pet food line, and moved from Boulder, Colorado to New England, and started that, and was there with them for about a year before before we had to shut that line down domestically in the United States. It continued on in Canada for a while, but I sort of got laid off, and that opened up a door at Blue Buffalo. And while I was at Global One, I really had to hustle. I really had to move, and I was in New York and Boston, going basically to these distributors and accounts, and it taught me a lot. So although it was a short time with those guys, I kind of cut my teeth with them while kind of being on my own and learning the industry. And New York, as you know, is if you can do business in New York, I feel like you can do it anywhere. And that helped kind of get me in touch with the guys from Blue when I lost my job at Global One, and that opened the door for Blue Buffalo, which has been the last about 6.5, 7 years before I went back to Global One Pet. But Blue, fantastic company, wonderful people, passionate, focused. It's like an agency, marketing agency turned pet food company, and really has been the only new entry into that channel to really take on the big dogs. That's a bad pun, but like the Nestle's, the Mars, the large conglomerates of the world who've been firmly established for 30, 40, 50 years, and they did it in a number of infuriating ways to the competition. But it was a wonderful experience, and just happy to have had some time there.
That's awesome. And so I think it's well known that first off, that's a really fascinating journey, and kind of lots of twists and turns. But I think most people know that sales is kind of a really valuable skill in life as well as in any career. But actually doing the sales function at any company is the lifeblood of the organization. It's what gets money through the door. It's the top line. It's incredibly important. If you could take me back to the very early days, you graduated college, and you're thinking, what do I want to do? Tell me about what it felt like to get into sales. Like how did you first kind of make your way in, and what was that decision process like?
Sure. Well, I was a theology major at my college, and but I've always been attracted to business, but my head wasn't in that space in college. I wasn't ready to really kind of dive into it, and so I chose another major. And so I'm in order to graduate from my college, everyone has to go through this kind of seminar, get you ready for leaving school and get resume all together. And this professional comes in and basically kind of goes through everyone's stuff and makes things more attractive on paper, and does test quizzes and interviews, and I interviewed with this guy, and we just started talking and talking and having a great conversation. And I think there was a flow that kind of happened back and forth, and I was still unaware of what I was deciding to do. I was thinking trade. I like to use my hands. I like to be active. But I had a desire to make some money in my life and be able to provide for the things that I would desire or like. So long story short, at the end of this seminar, we had spent a few days together, kind of sharpened everything up. We were talking in basically my exit interview, and we crossed off my resume and said, "Hey, dude," and he basically looked at me and said, "Hey, I think you've got a gift in to be able to connect and communicate with people quickly and easily, and I'm earnest. I try to tell the truth in everything that I do and show that." And he said, "I think you'd have a really good chance of aspiring to the money you want to make in the sales arena." And I had at that point in my life, my brother Steve, myself, and a few of my friends at school had been working in this retail store, Alpine Shop, and it was there's a 3-store chain. And I think we had the smallest account, this tiny 3,000 square foot, 2,000 square foot location in a satellite mall, but we were banging. The store was moving volume, and it seriously, because we had 4 guys in there who were all a little chatty, who liked gear. We were all climbers and bikers and hikers and loved to be outdoors, and it was the passion that was coming through, just as much as the technical gear knowledge, I guess you could say, and the use of it. And we were out there, doing it, biking, hiking, whatever. Yeah, that's where I first said, hey, I might want to go into this, and then it was a scale of economics decision after that to get into pet, of course, and also my passions as well, my background.
Sure. Wow, I never knew you guys did that. That's neat. REI and stores like that are just one of my favorite consumer experiences. I could just spend a day in those stores just talking to the folks in there and learning about the gear but yeah, you're right. Having someone who actually knows how to use the equipment, knows where it came from, how it was made, why design decisions were made, that really helps with that process of selling and communicating, marketing. Just out of curiosity, you talked about being a theology major. Is there anything that you bring from that study of all the world's religions that you bring to either your career or your personal life that kind of rings a bell?
Yeah. I'm happy with my major. I don't look back on it and say, oh, why did I do that?
Sure.
Definitely not. It prepared me in a lot of ways, but not like directly, I guess you could say, indirectly, but it achieved the same goal. I guess first off, the ability to process lots of information and long reading in like a foreign language, and to be able to like bring that back and to try to read and write about it is a difficult thing. Yeah. Probably the hardest thing. I mean, just think about the King James Version Bible when it was written. I mean, it's like a foreign language, right? So it was a ton of study, but I think what drove me into sales is I got a ton of exposure to different people, different religions, different thought systems, and economies of thought. And I think that I learned that there's a lot of good in this world, and there's a unifying factor for us all. And if you can hit that, and you can do that by being kind or finding the solution to the problem, you can do great things. So there was a lot of analysis. There's a lot of reading. I had to produce some pretty big papers more frequently than some of my contemporaries at school. But in that same vein, Joe, I learned about a lot of cultures and that unifying factor between everyone. Which is everyone's got their own opinion on it, but kindness, respect, trust, love. And being able to help and find a solution for people. And I try to channel that into my sales. So I guess that's a bit of a stretch, but learning, building on that foundation has definitely helped me in sales. And I had a fantastic instructor who was a 30-year Marine Navy chaplain. I think he was Princeton educated, and a guy named Mike Hamilton. Fantastic guy. And he kind of took me under his wing, and he was used to rambunctious boys, obviously, from his time in the Marines and Navy, and he was excellent about steering the path while not pushing the agenda. So he's one of my favorite instructors for sure.
Yeah, well, it goes back to the question of what's the purpose of education, right? Is it to simply train you for the skill sets you need in the workplace, or is it to create a more well-rounded, educated person that can interact in the world in a multitude of ways? And I think that's one of the big advantages, I think, of more of a broad education foundation. On the topic of connecting with people, you talk about connecting with people, understanding different perspectives. If I were asked, what is your superpower, I would say it's the ability to create connections and relationships with new people right away. Be memorable, be engaging, find out what people are about, And I don't know if you view yourself in that way, but I guess my question is, how much of that, from your perspective, being that person, in my view, how much of that is natural, just comes off the tip of your tongue, and how much of it is calculated, is trained, how much is trained versus just natural, and how much do you work on that?
I mean, I think 60-40, 50-50. I think it's important to know your audience and to know what they need, and to be that, help them find that right program. Do they care about margin? Do they care about volume? Do they care about growing? Do they want to grow a brand, or do they want an established brand? Their quality control. So if you can understand your customer, you can sort of, not softball, but you can, it shows that you've taken an interest in their business, and you hit their hot buttons, and then you combine that with, that other 50%. You call it, natural, but I call it, there's a method to the madness, and that's, be kind and follow through on what you say, and just be honest and try to present them with the solution. And if they say no, just look them in the face and smile and shake their hand, and get them again next week when they have another need. So it's like, I think it's 50-50, Joe, for sure. But the technical side is important. I just said, knowing about their business and what they want. You get a lot of that from, looking at the data, and having access to the data is key, Joe, for sure. Mm-hmm. But being able to look at, let's say market data, GFK, something like that, and recognize a need for a customer, and to be able to bring them a solution, a profitable solution where they could potentially generate revenue. That's the niche, I guess.
True. I think that's a good point. I worked with a guy in sales who said to me that the follow-through was one of the most important aspects of what he did, because there are a number of naturally gregarious folks that get into sales, and they can chum it up, and they can have a beer and have fun on the golf course. But in terms of being prepared, having the answers to technical questions, being able to follow through with every customer, oftentimes that is where people get tripped up. But I don't want to, I also don't want to underestimate the natural side, and I just to paint a picture, because I think I have about, 10% of what you have in this area. But just to paint a picture, you and I were at a wedding recently, where we knew a few people. We knew the family, we knew the groom side very well, and I'm out there talking to a lot of the groom's friends from other walks of life, and feel like I'm getting into it, and being very extroverted. And then I see you talking to the bride's side of the family, who are from Peru. Questionable how much English they actually speak, and you just sit down at the table with them and start chatting it up with them. And I was thinking, that's just classic Mike. So explain that to me.
I don't know. Well, I think everyone has a wedding personality. You get there's Mike, and then there's wedding Mike, and then there's Joe, and there's wedding Joe, and everyone becomes this larger than life character at a wedding. But I don't know. They were the family of a good friend of ours. They were sitting by themselves. They didn't know any English, or they knew some. A few of them did, but not all of them. And I wanted to go over and say hello and welcome them into this little tribe that we have amongst all of our friends, and of course with Paul, the guy who got married. So I don't know what it is, and I'm also curious about people, Joe. Mm-hmm. I'm really curious. I want to know kind of who they are and where they came from, and everyone's got such a great story to tell, and you can learn a lot from people. in not a lot of time from what they say. And turns out one of the guys I was speaking to is an older gentleman. Turned out to be some kind of minister or the Department of Ag for the country of Peru. So it's just like, you wouldn't think that. You're looking at the table, everyone's having like a really relaxed time and not a lot of talking. And they were just kind of great to meet and also practice my Spanish on, which is conversational at best, generally not, but so yeah, it was I don't know if that's a gift though. I mean, I think it's just being comfortable with who you are and being able to navigate a conversation. Awkward pauses are okay for me. Like, I think people will say a lot in awkward pauses. I learned that early on when I sat in front of this executive, and I just started talking and talking and talking and talking, and then I realized that I just told him everything that I didn't want to tell him, and all he did was sit there and just didn't say anything. And this was early in my career, and the power of silence. And so I let that silence go sometimes, and then everyone's voice can be heard in a sense.
Really, is that a technique? Tell me more about that. The power of the awkward silence.
Well, I mean, people call it awkward. I think a lot of the younger kids today, and I'm technically still a younger kid, so I hear it a lot, is like, oh, everything's awkward. That's awkward. Why would I do that? It's awkward. But like, it's okay to have an awkward situation. It's okay to that through that struggle. Oftentimes, you get a lot of progress. Letting people speak and opening up, and silence is not a bad thing, right? Like, silence will be filled eventually. And obviously it's harder when you're speaking in another language, and there's probably going to be more silence because of that. But I definitely use that in my work, and being able to listen to people, Joe. I mean, that's ultimately, and hear them and remember them. I'm a lot better at remembering details of people's lives. I'm pretty good with names. I'm not fantastic, enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be, like everyone I know. But I remember details about their life, things that I think that they're passionate about, and not even about work. I knew this girl who was really like passionate about mountain biking, and so we didn't really like know each other. But every time I saw this girl, we talked about mountain biking, and we never worked together. A few years later on, she was in a role where we could work together, and the relationship was formed, but not because I wanted to do business with her, but because we shared a common interest and a passion, and that's all we talked about. And I made it clear that that's all I really wanted to talk about, you're not force selling people, you're building, relationships with them. And I think that's important, to not just talk about the work, but also like the things that they do. I mean, my brother Steve's got this great adage, and I got to quote him on this. But he, when he interviews people, one of the first things he does when he asks them is, "What do you like to do for fun?" And it's sort of like a weird thing to start an interview with, but if people can't don't open up about like what they're passionate about or what they like, whether it's as boring as reading a book, and reading a book is not boring, but just as an example, or being with their family, or running, or whatever it is. If people can't talk about what their passions, it might be difficult for them to really form those deep, true relationships, and the trusting ones, and the ones that are super high function, where you don't have to have 10 emails going back and forth trying to explain something. You can do it via an email and maybe a text, or maybe a beer, and you can get stuff done very, very quickly when you have that kind of established trust, so they know that you're not trying to run anything by them, and vice versa.
And do you just remember all that stuff? Do you just keep all that stuff in your head, or do you have a system that you use to kind of track those things and jog your memory?
I use a standard CRM tool, but really it's in my head, it's in my phone. I'll write little things here and there, but it's mostly in my head, Joe. Just trying to remember, people, and I'm great with the face, and as far as being able to recognize people and seek them out, and yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Some of it's working together, but a lot of it's just, a conversation we had 3 years ago at a bar in Las Vegas, at an industry show, and we had a good laugh, and I remember a good, genuine laugh for myself too. So if you can make me laugh, you're pretty much in.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, and I think what you talk about in terms of sitting down at the table with the Peruvian family, because they didn't know anyone, because they were kind of the ones who were new to the group. I think that goes beyond just being gregarious. That's going out and seeking out the folks that maybe are less comfortable. And I always think back to when I first moved to a new school in Connecticut. There were one or two people that reached out to me and kind of noticed that I was the new kid, more lonely at that point, and I always thought that was a really valuable skill to have, and obviously now as a parent, I'm trying to instill that value, but it's a hard thing to do. It's both. It's difficult as an adult, let alone as a kid, being kind of, much less mature, much less secure in yourself. I guess, how do you think about that as a parent? Your kids are a little bit older than mine. Is that something you try to instill with them, and how do you do that?
Sure. My kids are, a little young. I mean, they're basically 5.5, 4, and 1 on the way. And I'm not going to force that on them. Mm-hmm. I think there is a little bit of natural, but if they don't want to give even one of my friends a high five, and they don't have to, mm-hmm. Because I want them to be comfortable, and if they would like to give a high five, that's great. But if they don't, I'm not going to be like, give them a high five or give them a hug. My kids don't overhug, mm-hmm. Just go around, and because I want them to really, truly, genuinely feel that. Mm-hmm. By the way, my kids give high fives all the time if they want to, but if they
Sure.
don't know you, and if they just met you or something like that, they're not going to do that. And I'm okay with that. Mm-hmm. I'm okay with them being a little more reserved, at least until they're older. Mm-hmm. But I think manners are important in a sense. So I teach them. I try to teach them to say hello and be grateful and thankful for the gifts and the opportunities that they receive. And I think they're starting to get it. I think Evie's almost 6 years old now, and she's starting to come together as far as thanking people for generosity, or if she's visiting a friend's house, mm-hmm. or even if I put another helping of mac and cheese on her plate, because they just don't know when they need to be grateful. And so I guess that's where I kind of focus, is just on that gratitude aspect of it, and to do unto others, and to be kind, but also be interesting and take an interest in things. I don't care what they do in life. I really don't. Mm-hmm. I know that they're going to be great. I just want them to want to do it, and to be interested in something, and not just to work a job. I think that's a limitless career opportunity.
It's so much more impactful with kids when you show them instead of tell them. I dealt with this recently because at the park we would oftentimes, a new kid would show up, and this is a year or two ago, I would tell my older son, hey, go say hi to that kid and see how he's doing, or something like that. And he would just give me this look like, I don't want to do that, like, no way. And I kind of got continuous resistance anytime I tried that, and I'm thinking, well, he's normally kind of a friendly kid. So then I started thinking about it, and then I decided maybe I'll flip it on its head, and instead of doing that, I would just go and say hi to the kid, and say, hey, what's your name? Hey, who are you? And that was a much more productive process, I think, because it took the pressure off of my son, and it again, it was showing by, or teaching by showing, or teaching by leading, as opposed to, hey, go do this, and putting all the pressure on you.
Yeah, I mean, and then your boy is mimicking, and following,
Right.
and that's a very easy way for young children to learn, is by mimicking. It's not an easy way. It is the greatest way. That's how they really kind of learn some foundational skills in their life. But in particular in the youth, that's really cool. And so when you went over and talked to this kid, could you transition out slowly, fade to black, or did you have to stay? Did you have to stay with them the whole time?
I think I'm more in the stay with them category, and I think what ends up happening is I end up like leading a group of kids to play, like, hey, let's all play hide and seek, and again, that takes the pressure off, my kids to go ahead and lead that. But I've noticed more recently they've started taking the lead and doing more of that on their own, and whether, and I don't take full credit, because part of that is just growing up or maturing or going through a different phase or building relationships. But I have been able to back out slowly over time. But in the moment, it's kind of like, hey, you're bought in now. You better come up with a fun game. But something else you said was interesting to me, which was, you don't have to give people a high five. You don't have to hug people. That's something that my wife, Tava, felt very strongly about. And you might identify this with this, but coming from the Italian family, it was, you have to kiss grandma, right? You have to kiss great grandma. She gets to pinch your cheeks. Like, you are not in charge of your body. We decide who you hug and kiss, and if you don't like it, too bad. And so for me, it was a bit jarring to flip that and say, no, you're in charge of your body as a kid. But I've come around full circle, and I think it's really important to kind of give young people that ownership over their body, and I'm in charge, and I need to feel comfortable with touching people. Especially in today's world, and so that's absolutely something we practice as well.
Because think about it, like, the parents have probably known themselves for a while, or let's say like two parents are friends, right? And they've known each other for like 25 years, and you want your kid to like the other person, right? Mm-hmm. And to show that your kids are great, are happy, great kids, and they love you too. But this is the first time that your children are meeting the other people sometimes.
Right.
So think about yourself. Think about like, going out with a group of friends and like meeting someone for the first time, and the first thing you do is jump in for a giant hug. That's not me.
Right.
Do I like to give hugs? You betcha. Just with people that I'm comfortable with. And I feel that way about the kids too. Your wife's a smart woman, Joe.
I agree for the record. I think that's, and that's even more true, I think, with these days with people who have families that are not in the immediate vicinity. And in a lot of ways, it's probably harder because aunts and uncles, grandparents come into town. The kids haven't seen them in person for 6 months, and then all of a sudden it's, hey, why aren't I getting a big hug and a kiss? But I mean, luckily, I think in our family that there's a general understanding, and we've communicated our policy on it. But I imagine that's something that's challenging in some cases.
Could be for sure, but nothing. My mom was a school teacher growing up. She's seen lots of kids. So she's got this kind of good perspective that every kid's a little bit different. Every kid's going to grow at a different time. Sometimes it's okay to push, but other times it's not. Don't push, because they need to learn on their own. I had to learn lessons on my own growing up. Sometimes you could tell me like 12 times, and I'd be like, okay, and I'd still go do the opposite. And I needed to learn, on my own. And now those convictions are firm in my foundation, and I don't make those mistakes again. So it's like, I mean, every kid's a little bit different to me. And some, like my good friend in Florida, his kid, first time he met me, like ran across the floor and just gave me a bear hug. And I was actually uncomfortable with it. I was like, whoa, where did this come from? And then I, of course, gave him a big hug because, he was listening to his dad, and his dad, I grew up with this kid, and his dad had given a lot of, got a lot of backstory on us, and the kid just loved it and loved the stories, and honestly, and just, and wanted to know all about these different things that I did when I was a kid with his dad, and, there was like this, there was a history there, which I didn't have yet, so it almost was like a role reversal.
Yeah, my youngest is like that. He'll just minutes after meeting someone, a stranger at the park, he'll just start, especially if it's a woman, he'll just start like kind of hugging with them, sitting with them, smiling, giggling. So yeah, there's the other end of the spectrum. But how are you feeling about you have two girls, you have a boy on the way. How are you thinking about, having a boy versus, having girls? What's that thought process like, having grown up with both?
Well, you're one of three boys. I'm one of three boys plus a sister. So big families, but kind of lots of guys around. And I'm great with it. Yeah, Kelly and I talked about this, my wife Kelly, and if I had had another girl, I would have been ecstatic because these girls, I don't raise my girls very much differently than I think I would raise a boy. I'm sure there's going to be different moments, but I try to teach the same philosophies and sort of how you should go about life and or how you should think about things. Or so I'm doing pretty good. Two girls I thought was going to be like early on. I didn't. I didn't know how it was going to go because the personalities hadn't come out yet, and I didn't know. I wasn't around that, growing up as much. But it's been fantastic, and my girls are badasses, and I hope to make them, or to assist them or to guide them. Actually, I don't want to make them anything. I want them to want to be something, and be passionate about whatever they do. So I think it's a great time. It's a great time. It's a lot, right? Like I have to check myself sometimes in my learned language, when I'm talking to my girls and stuff like that about how to phrase things, and there's a lot of there's a lot of high pitched screaming sometimes with my children. But other than that, it's fantastic, Joe. I take my girls canoeing, fishing, play soccer. And then we go and we brush the doll's hair and play with mermaids and do all our fun, typical girls type stuff. So just all I want to do is just make them balanced. And I'm excited for this boy. It's going to be, it's funny because all these people are coming up to me like, yeah, you ready for the boy? And and I'm like, yeah, I am. And it's funny because I thought I would feel kind of differently, but the psyche in my mind about it is exactly the same, whether it's a boy or a girl. I know I'm probably going to eat my words on this one because that's the way life goes. But I've got a loving, wonderful family around me, and everyone takes care. So I'm feeling pretty good about this next one.
Yeah, and you talked about being a rambunctious boy. You were quite a handful. I think your mother would say you were quite a handful growing up.
Yeah.
but you've changed a lot since then. I mean,
I had lots of energy. I had lots of energy, tremendous amount, and which was good for sports. It was great for sports, but my brothers and I were all pretty excitable fellows, and we were always playing practical jokes, and I think my dad we had rules. We had lots of rules. My mom was sort of the enforcer. My dad was also the enforcer, but in a different way. We definitely had rules, but my dad was, I guess he was. I've heard this a lot from like older school parents. That's not a technical term, but just kind of older parents, where he never wanted to box us in. And he used to tell my mom that, and she never got it, and I never got it either. But he would say, "Don't box them in." And it's funny because and we were never doing like really bad stuff, like like I would jump out of a tree and land in a pile of leaves and get hurt or something, and then my mom would yell at me. He's like, "It's okay. He's on an adventure." Like he never wanted our creativity to be stifled, and if we needed to go for a walk, he would let us. And I don't know, his approach was really good, but he definitely never really boxed us in. Now we had discipline and we got grounded and had all that crazy stuff, which is actually not that crazy because it happens, but he was a little bit different in his strategy. Okay, I was never allowed to have guns in the house when I was a kid. I'm talking like play guns, ever. So I think the first playground I ever really saw was at your house, Jim.
we had an arsenal.
Yeah, I know. I was like, what are these things? The shovel? No, it was play gun, but I wasn't allowed to have a play gun in the house. And but like when I was like 7 years old, my dad on Christmas Day goes down into the rafters and pulls down a BB gun, teaches me how to shoot it, and says, "Go have fun." And we would go out, and we had some property and go out into the fields, and we weren't getting into trouble, and we would just kind of go and be boys, and we definitely pushed some moments, but we survived. So it was, we weren't allowed to play with them, but we were allowed to use them, but we had to respect them. And I think that was important. So we were taught some basic elements of gun safety and all that stuff. And really, this is just for a pellet gun or whatever. But we could go out and use it, but we couldn't shoot at other people. I mean, obviously, and even with play guns, like you could come over to my house as a kid, but you couldn't bring your play gun. So. But it wasn't like he was anti-gun, because he wasn't. I mean, you got a 7-year-old BB gun. That's crazy. But he trusted us, and he taught us, and we really respected that. So
I mean, that was pretty progressive for your parents to not allow play guns, in that time period. That was, I think, less common. But it's interesting that the flip side of it is that they would let you have a BB gun at a relatively young age, under proper guidance and whatnot. Our house was kind of the opposite, in that not only did we have every kind of play gun, but we also had real guns in the house. My dad, being an ex-military guy, had 2 handguns locked in a safe for most of our growing up, and similarly, we, not quite that young, but at a relatively young age, we went out and shot BB guns, shot real guns, early teen type of years, and learned about gun safety, learned about never point a gun at something you don't want to shoot, all those very important tips, and things I still think about. I think I respect guns and the danger of guns, I think, a lot more than a lot of people have a lot more experience with guns, because of that kind of early experience. You talked a little bit about your dad. I mean, how old were you when you lost your dad? Talk to me a little bit about that experience. I remember it well myself, but how has that changed the person you are, the way you want to be a dad, and the way you want to build your family?
Ooh, a lot. I'd say my dad passed when I was 16 years old, sort of right in the middle of high school, lots of stuff going on. I was sort of forced to grow up pretty quickly. I had a younger brother and sister, and I would just rain terror on them. I would just absolutely just rain terror. Like my poor little brother. Oh my gosh, we'd get him dressed up in pads and just put him out in the mud and just beat him up. And we were just playing football, but he was so much smaller than us. But I stopped thinking. I stopped thinking so much about myself, to be perfectly honest, and what I was doing and where I was going and what's going to happen to me versus what's going to happen to them and the people around me, and really it was my immediate family. And I was sort of thrust into this role, and my older brother even more so. But I did have a fundamental change, and it was like a reboot for me. It really was. Like I sort of shut down for about 6 months, and then kind of came back, kind of almost like, living in a different purpose. Still an SOB sometimes. Don't get me wrong. Still raining down on my sister and brother, but always with this little growing seed of and I'm not feeling a void of my father, but that little parental seed planted in the back of my head, because I wanted to be there for them, because I felt honestly, Joe, I loved my dad. He was a great guy, great man, good businessman, good writer, great athlete, and I felt honestly really bad that my sister and brother Dave didn't get more time with him, like Steve, my older brother, and I did. And I tried to, and I could never emanate. I could never match that at that age. But I tried to get little pieces along the way, and I think that made me feel better, because it brought me closer to my dad, and it also provided some care and comfort that might normally not be there with a single mother household, to my brother, my younger brother and younger sister.
Yeah, I can't imagine how challenging that was. I mean, and I was there for a lot of it, but it was like, it was like looking through the glass, right? I mean, you can only get so much of a sense of it, but your personality did change quite a bit. I would say as a result of that, having to mature early on, and yeah, I think there was obviously a grieving period, but and you moved, so we weren't together day to day, but.
Right.
I think that that had a big effect on your maturity level and the way you kind of view the world and whatnot. I mean, and that's just me from the outside looking in, but it seems like you managed stress a lot better. I mean,
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah, and not to get too far into this, but it was a pretty traumatic moment, and things don't compare sometimes to like the stress of a traumatic moment like that. And that was so I think you're right. I try to be cooler. I tend to be cooler in moments. Everyone has their moments, right? But being able to kind of see the calm, because ultimately I know if I'm selling, it's just dog food, or it's just treats, or it's just some other line I'm trying to nail into a national retailer or whatever, because that is what it is, and it doesn't hold a candle to the depth of a loss or another traumatic moment. It just so yeah, it definitely cooled me out. I also found I found my rhythm a little bit after that, where I realized I needed to be working out a lot to get some sort of my heebie-jeebies. I'm talking about being a kid with tons of energy, just to be able to like come to a point where I need to listen to myself. My body needed to have action. I need to run 6 miles, 8 miles. I need to go bike 50, or swim a couple, or run up a mountain or something, and just enough, like every few days to kind of cool my jets. And then I just had I was much more clear in the mind.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, and it's said that that's especially true for boys, in the early years. But I think for all kids, the idea of just sitting in a classroom for 6 hours and hardly moving, recesses going away, is just, I don't know, it just sounds terrible, and it sounds short-sighted and just illogical. I mean, I don't know if you're still this way, but I'm the way you were at that time, even today. Whereas if I don't really exercise for 3 or 4 days straight, I start to get anxious and jittery and irritable.
Yeah, I think there's probably some chemical reason for this, but that probably dates back hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years. But like, I just think I need, I rest in action a little bit. My mind can shut it down. And I stop thinking about the things that are right in front of me, and I start looking out to what I'm doing, or down the road if I'm going for a run, and I can shut it off. And it's like a break for my mind in a sense. My body takes over, a lot of it's, muscle memory and doing all this stuff. And I come back and I feel refreshed. And I could go out for a 10-mile run, and come back and work better and with more energy and more enthusiasm than if I had just stayed there, and tried to work through that moment. So it's, I don't know. It's something. It's ingrained in me, though. I have to carve out time for me. I know it's a part of my professional success, and if I don't do that, I'll get into trouble, and I won't be as clairvoyant in my moments. And it has to be done. It is a non-negotiable on my list.
Same here. I think for me, it's I just view it as therapy. Like that is a replacement, maybe not a replacement, but a kind of a necessary aspect of my kind of mental health, as in addition to my physical health. And the return on investment from both a career and a personal life perspective is just off the charts. And so let me ask you this: if now that we're approaching middle age, I guess you could say, quarter life crisis type age. Mm-hmm. What advice would you have given yourself, whether it's like earlier in your career or as a young adult, knowing what you know now? What kind of advice would you have for yourself, a younger version of yourself?
Oh, I would have said lots of things. Honestly, I would have told myself to take more time for me, in a sense, and not that less time like at the office, because I think it's important to put your time in. And I worked a lot, or in my early days, a lot of hours, and that time is irreplaceable, and it accelerated me at a trajectory because I was consuming so much information and trying to grow and learn and build my business, and being at the office and being around people is important. But we just talked about the rhythm a little bit, and finding your rhythm. I would have told myself my rhythm a little bit more, because it was such a learned process, through trial and error, and sometimes error. I've always learned from my mistakes. I think about them. I dwell on them probably too long. I think if I could disconnect worrying so much about the moment, versus making sure that you learn from the error. I mean that, and I told myself, now telling myself 10 years ago, I think I would have removed a lot of unnecessary stressors along the way that shouldn't have affected me or shouldn't have made me act a certain way. But really, I would have shared my rhythm, shared my balance. Hey, it's like I didn't know. It's like I knew myself at that age, but I didn't really know myself or what I need to perform at the highest level. Being an athlete in college, what you need to do. You got to hit this ball. You got to catch that ball. You got to shoot the goal. Whatever. Your end goal, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And how to do it. You by practice and repetition and teamwork and communication and all this other stuff.
It's more structured.
Way structured.
Yeah.
And it's secretly, although I'm not on the outside, I work in the corporate world, but I don't really. That's not a desire for me. I need to have a structure, and it can be loose too. Mm-hmm. You have your 24-hour day, and I don't have to go for a workout or at the same time every day. Mm-hmm. Right. It can move around. So like some people have to get up at 5 a.m. and go and do it. But sometimes I wake up early in the morning at 6 a.m. and I got something rolling in my mind, and I want to go sit at my desk for 2.5 hours and bang out some good emails or make some calls to the East Coast or whatever that may be. And I know that the time put in there, I'll be able to offset that later in the day with some kind of workout. So just knowing the rhythm for myself, and also, Joe, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
And to find good mentors and to seek them out and to make and to take nothing, you know, to take nothing from them. Like, you know, when I seek out a mentor, I don't want, you know, I just want to listen. Honestly, I just want to be around them. I want to see how they function and how they work. And don't be afraid to ask someone about that. To say, hey, you know, this is what I'm trying to do in my career. You know, you know, I like what you're doing. You know, can I observe? Can I help? You know, can you teach me? And I think people, you know, will be open to that as long as you're earnest about it. And yeah, I think those are the few little tidbits. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton more. I'd be like, you know, don't eat so much, or
don't drink so much. Yeah,
don't drink so much. You know,
my answer.
Keep that car that you sold that you definitely shouldn't have sold, but that kind of stuff.
In thinking about that question for myself, I would just tell myself to just not worry so much. I think that's, and you mentioned that as well, but just I remember very early in my career, and still to this day, but more so earlier, just being constantly worried about the future. Just, oh, what's going to happen? You know, what's going to happen if this project doesn't go well, or, you know, where am I going to be in 5 years? How's it all going to unfold? Whereas recently, I'm trying to, what I call, just be more comfortable with uncertainty, and just comfortable with, I don't know what's going to happen in 2 or 3 years, exactly where I'll be, exactly what I'll be doing, you know, exactly at what point in my career I will be, but just kind of having the confidence that I'll be able to handle it when I get there, and that good things will happen because I'm working hard now, and I'm not just working hard, but working with great people, working on something I believe in, and building relationships, you know, in a genuine way, and that just having more faith that it's going to work out is something I try to work on, and I definitely would have liked to be, you know, have a more honed skill set in that area earlier on in my life.
It's funny. Sometimes I think that the stress is, I know this is not super, the stress is almost needed though, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes for me.
Yes. There's a tension.
To keep me, and I don't want it, right? I don't want to have like these feelings upon me, but you almost need it, a stressor, in order to provoke a reaction. And the more pressure that is put on me, the greater the reaction that I have, to almost push it off of me, that big boulder off of me.
I know what you're saying.
So, but ultimately, when that boulder gets rolling, I mean, you know, I don't know about that.
No, I know what you mean. There's a tension, right? Because you could always look back and say, well, if I hadn't worried so much about that, I probably wouldn't. I might not have gotten my behind out of gear. In which case, you know, so all that worrying was actually productive in some way.
Yeah, although uncomfortable, and I'm totally okay with being uncomfortable. And I think going back to going and like meeting new people, like that can be an uncomfortable moment. But I'm okay with that. I've come to a point in my life where I've learned that being uncomfortable is not a bad thing.
Right.
It can actually produce amazing results. So yeah, but embracing it and learning how to embrace it and learning to recognize it, and it's almost like a learned behavior where you can say, hey, you know, here's how I'm feeling, but you know it's for the better, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, absolutely. And when you're uncomfortable, it's also when you're growing or you're learning, and so there's definite benefits to being uncomfortable. But it also has to be balanced with, you don't want to stress yourself out to the point where you are damaging your relationships, you know, your personal relationships or things like that. So like anything else, it's, you know, good balance is probably, you know, optimum.
Yeah, ripple effects. When the ripples start becoming bigger, you know, that's when you know that you maybe got to deal with something.
So let me ask you this next. And this is my favorite interview question that I ask. but it's also just something I think is interesting to ask anybody, is what do you believe that most people around you don't? In other words, what is your most unpopular opinion?
This one, that's an interesting question, Joe. And you don't get that one a lot, because no one really wants to hear your unpopular opinions, especially in this day. But I think you can take this a couple of ways. Um, I guess the number one for me would be it's okay to suffer a little bit, and it's okay to be uncomfortable in those moments. And it's not that you're not prepared, but when I'm in a situation where there's a lot of unknowns, I get very hyper focused. I know a lot of people do that way, and I think an easy way to equate this would be, distance running or something. In order to
Mm-hmm.
perform like at your best, you have to basically run yourself up to red line and back it down a little bit, just below that in order to perform. And it truly is an uncomfortable, suffering moment, as you try to get your best time or whatever that may be. But if you put that context into business, um, you know, you can't be afraid of hard work, right? And I've had, like, in the moment, it's terrible, right? Or I've had weeks and weeks of just a tremendous amount of work to do, or uncomfortable conversations with my customers, and it truly is sort of like those suffering moments, long hours, and these things can, like, grind on you big time,
Mm-hmm.
and controlling that grind is a big deal, and having the emotional fortitude to see through it. But I'm a firm believer where it's okay to suffer a little bit, and it's
Mm-hmm.
okay because through that suffering, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I grow a tremendous amount.
Mm-hmm.
And I become acutely focused on what needs to get done, and oftentimes those are new areas of thought, and you have to develop on the fly, in a sense, in particular, where so you can be uncomfortable, or you can suffer through things that you just don't know, and that's when the learning happens, right?
Yeah.
And I think back to college, or my first job out of college, where it was a whole new world for me, and my nerves were rocked, in a sense, but through those moments, I learned, I grew, and I understood what is needed to push through those moments where that suffering I was experiencing actually led to almost enlightenment, um, enlightenment in a sense. And I'm not saying, like, I mean, there is definitely a connection between, go back in history, like dark ages, and then, like, the enlightenment that came afterwards. But if you take it down to a small scale, to a personal scale, I think sometimes people need a little bit of adversity, and they need that sense. So you can prep as much as you want, and that always helps you. But I think you're always going to have those moments where adversity, or suffering, or being uncomfortable, don't shy away from it. You gotta face it head on. Meeting someone for the first time, doing something in the business world, putting yourself out on a limb.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think that's super important for people, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, but learn how to deal with those mistakes, and I think that's the preparation that you did, and like I said earlier, having a little bit of emotional fortitude to say, okay, let's be mature about this. What did I do wrong? Let's do it better this time. But I think that's an unpopular opinion in today's world, where you got that everyone's looking for the easy path, in a
Yeah.
sense, and and there's examples of suffering, like time spent, right? Uh, 2 to 3 years in a job that you don't like, that's kind of suffering, in a sense. But if you can see beyond it, and you can take the foundational skills that you're learning in that job and apply it to your next role, like, that suffering was totally worth it. And you might not have been able to get to that next spot, whether it's physically in your career or in your own mind,
without having to be uncomfortable and push through those dark moments and just be strong enough to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But that's, I mean, I know I've worked with quite a bit of people who cry foul, when they say, "Oh, I can't be here. I have to do things I have to leave. I don't have time for myself." And there's plenty of time for yourself in the day, but it's like you have to put that work in a sense, and you have to deal with those moments. And yeah, I think that's a pretty unpopular opinion, especially with a little bit younger people, where they want to work that's not everyone, obviously, but a lot of people I know have come into the workforce and want to shut it off right when they leave, and that's tough to do if you're trying to achieve something great. Yeah, I think that's pretty unpopular to suffer.
Yeah,
a little bit.
So I think about that in a couple different ways. One is what I've always said is when I'm learning is when I'm happiest, and necessarily I'm learning when I'm uncomfortable. Because if you're comfortable, you're not learning. You're just on cruise control.
Mm-hmm.
So I always like to try to at least put myself into new situations where I'm uncomfortable. Another way of that people say that is do things that you suck at. Try new things. Do things that you're specifically not good at, because it keeps you humble and it keeps you in that learning and growing mode. And I think the third way I'm thinking about this, just in hearing you describe the last piece about our generation or the younger generation, is this also ties to my theory about why most parents our age are not very good parents. And it's because life has been so easy for us, and it's just continually getting easier. We don't have to hail a cab anymore because there's Uber. We don't have to be bored. We don't have to sit in a waiting room and just be bored and keep our thoughts to ourselves. We can always turn on Netflix or something to distract us. And parenting, as you know, is really hard work, and it requires a lot of time and energy and focus and patience. And I think our generation is really just not used to that. I think most people our age are thinking, probably subconsciously, they're thinking, man, isn't there an app for this? Isn't there a company that can help me do this? Because it's so difficult, and we're not used to that anymore.
Yeah, no way. And a solution to that, like suffering, to me, because I dealt with this a lot in my early days, was a little adage that was provided to me, which was rest in action.
Yeah.
And I thought, someone told me that. I was like, what are you talking about? I need to rest. And but I ultimately, as I kind of pushed through it, was that I felt better and better and better as I accomplished the goals that I needed to do and the actions I needed to take. And my peace, in a sense, that calmness that I'm always trying to attain, came to me as I accomplished these tasks or the actions I needed to do, and therefore I started to rest in action. And that one stuck with me a little bit, as well as the other one. But yeah, I continued to feel better as I accomplished more tasks. And it can be, like my first job was, making 50 contacts a day. That's a lot. That's a lot of contacts, whether it's, email, phone call, then full write-ups on each one of those. So yeah, resting in action, I truly believe that's true. Well, at least in my story.
And just the follow-up would be, is there a limit to that? Is there such a thing as putting yourself purposefully through too much suffering?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. You have to know yourself. You have to know your physical bounds and where, when you gotta cry uncle, or going back to like the working out stuff. Like, I know that if I don't do that stuff, my ability to grind and push through tense moments or tasks is severely inhibited, because my mind's not in the state where I can handle all of that stuff. I get as the Italians say, and our families say, agita, in a sense. where it's just like this building in my chest. And yeah, I think it can be, definitely.
Yeah, but it's important to know where that line is. That way you can get to the line and realize what it is, and then back off. So you can kind of find that balance. Whereas most people probably don't even get close to the line.
Yeah, but yeah, and to keep that going a little bit, like when you have let's say you have like your two your vessel, you have two vessels, right? And then you got one vessel full of all the energy that you can put into the day, and then you have another vessel where all that energy comes from, and they kind of go up and down. As one goes up, the other one goes down. But like knowing how to fill that second vessel up with the things that you need so you can achieve your day. So going back to the working out stuff, I have to fill that halfway with working out, and the rest is filled obviously with family and children and doing things for myself and taking time for myself, to be alone, because you in this world of like social and family and it's so easy to get in touch with people that sometimes you just don't have time to think on your own. So knowing, like, I know it's a weird analogy to do over on our podcast, but those vessels, right? You've got your work vessel, and then you've got like the vessel that you need, to be full in order to achieve your goals in your work life. So, yeah.
That's a really helpful visual, I think, for me, and hopefully for other people as well. I think we're running out of time here, but and I want to be respectful of your time. But is there anything else you want to promote in terms of some of the products that your company makes, or any of your own stuff?
Sure. We've got a couple of new items that I think are pretty disruptive, pretty exciting in the industry. There's an item called, the brand's called Cheesy Chews. Silly name, but fantastic product, which is a Himalayan cheese shaped into a dog knot that's very digestible, really easy for dogs to chew on, in particular for puppies and senior dogs, where Himalayan cheese is traditionally a very hard chew, and this is very soft. And you can feed it like a treat. So that one's you can find that at cheesychews.com. And then the other new innovation we're bringing to market is a brand called Dentables, which is actually pretty exciting. It's a dog dental chew, but it's made of casein, which is sort of the other side of whey. Whey is like a fast-burning protein. Casein's the slow-burning protein, and this is all derived from milk-based product. And it's an extremely high protein chew. So right now in the dental world and pet, you've got all these dog chews out there and dental chews that have super low protein levels, and they're putting a little fluoride in it, and that's what's helping the dog's teeth. But this is sort of flipping it on its head a little bit. And the brand's called Dentables, and that one, both of those items launched in the last 6 months, and that you can find that at dentables.com.
Excellent. Mike, this has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed chatting with you, as always. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
You bet, Joey. Always a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
All right, let's do it again soon. All right, thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Epic Human Podcast. Please remember to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever app you happen to be using. And if you want to keep up to date on the latest Epic Human Podcasts, please follow us on Twitter or Facebook at Epic Human Pod. And if you have any ideas for guests or feedback on the show, please reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.